We spent the last lecture considering various objections that philosophers have raised against consequentialism. Consequentialism is said to be too demanding, to require unrealistic motivations, and to permit or even require unjust actions. If you think these objections are powerful, then you'll be looking for a different theory of right and wrong. Today and tomorrow, we'll study a school of thought that might provide what you're looking for. It's derived from the work of one of the greatest philosophers in history, Immanuel Kant, who lived in what's now Germany in the 18th century. The school of thought is known as Kantianism. The term deontology is also often used to refer more generally to theories of this type. The word deontology comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty. The idea of duty plays a role in all moral theories, but for Kantians, the idea of acting from duty has special significance. Kant has a distinctive theory of the good, according to which the only unconditionally good thing is what he calls a good will. A good will is what you have if you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and for no other reason. A good will is good only because of your intentions, not because of its effects. To act from duty, according to Kant, is to do the right thing for the right reason, even though you may have desires to do the wrong thing. Just doing the right thing isn't enough. You have to do it for the right reason. Kant gives the example of a shopkeeper who charges a fair price, but only because he believes that overcharging his customers will be bad for business in the long run. He's doing the right thing, but he's not doing it because it's right. If he thought he could get away with overcharging them forever, he'd do it. Kant's view surprises some people. Kant writes that a man who preserves his own life because he has a desire to go on living is also failing to act from duty. He's obligated to preserve his life, but he should do it because it's the morally correct thing to do, not because he wants to do it. Similarly, with someone who's generous only because making others happy makes him happy. It's right to be generous, but Kant thinks you should be generous because it's right, not because it makes you feel good. For Kant, someone who acts for the right reasons, even if bad effects come from it, is morally superior to someone who produces wonderful effects, but does it for the wrong reasons. Kant thinks the morality of our actions has nothing to do with results. That's a major contrast with act consequentialism. Let's shift now from Kant's account of moral motivation to his moral principles themselves. Today we'll discuss a principle called the principle of universalizability. It's also known as the formula of universal law. The principle of universalizability is difficult to understand, so we're going to start with some other principles that are easier to understand and also easy to confuse with Kant's principle. That way you'll understand what's unique about Kant's position and different from anything you've seen before. Consider the question, what if everyone did what you're doing? We can formulate a principle that goes like this. If overall happiness would be lower if everyone did X, then X is immoral. This principle has acceptable results in some cases. If everyone in a traffic jam uses the emergency lane, for example, then the traffic jam only gets worse. Making an exception for yourself just for your own benefit is often wrong. But there are other cases in which the principle has implausible results. If everyone decided not to have children, then humanity would become extinct, which would lower overall happiness to zero. But deciding not to have children isn't therefore wrong, is it? Some people make lousy parents, after all. The point is that the principle we're considering makes immorality relative to how the action is described. Let's move to a different test, which will remind you of the golden rule. How would you like it if I did that to you? Other ways of phrasing it are, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or treat others as you would like to be treated. This is a fine rule to teach to children, and it's a handy test for adults to use. But it's no good as a fundamental moral principle, for several reasons. One problem is that the golden rule makes morality depend on individual desires. It allows a masochist to whip other people because she enjoys being whipped. It allows me to hurt you if I'm willing to be hurt myself. That can't be right. Kant wants to improve on the golden rule and the what if everyone did that principle. He proposes what we'll call a principle of universalizability, which states an act is morally permissible if and only if its maxim is universalizable. To understand the principle of universalizability, we must first understand what a maxim is. A maxim is the principle of action that you give yourself when you're about to do something. It's a rule by which you act. A maxim states what you're about to do and why you're about to do it. Here are some examples of maxims. I'm walking to the store in order to buy milk. I'm donating to Oxfam in order to relieve world hunger. I'm stealing this iPod in order to listen to music. I'm cheating on this exam in order to pass the course. Two individuals can do the same thing for different reasons. They have different maxims. Kant thinks it's important that the morality of our actions always be within our control. If it depends only on our maxims, then it always is. Let's look now at Kant's test for the universalizability of maxims. The first step is to formulate your maxim clearly. State what you intend to do and why you intend to do it. Next, imagine a world in which everyone supports your maxim and acts on it consistently. Then ask, can the goal of my action be achieved in such a world? I hope you can see how Kant's test is different from the what if everyone did that principle we discussed earlier today. That principle asks if unhappiness would result. It's similar to the rule consequentialist theory we discussed last time. It asks us to imagine the maxim universally adopted and then predict if the resulting world would contain less happiness than if a different maxim had been adopted. Kant's test doesn't look at overall happiness. It looks at something narrower. Could the goal of my own action be achieved in a world where everyone adopted my maxim? Let's see how this plays out in a specific hypothetical case. This is Kant's case, and it's a case that makes his theory look pretty good. A man wants someone to lend him money. He secretly knows that he'll be unable to repay the loan, but he promises to repay it anyway. This is what we call a lying promise. What's this man's maxim? Well, it's something like this. Whenever I want money, I'll get a loan by promising to repay, even if I know I won't be able to do so. The next question is whether this maxim is universalizable. To figure that out, we have to put the maxim in universalized form, like this. Anyone who wants money shall get a loan by promising to repay, even if he knows he won't be able to do so. What would happen if everyone acted on this maxim? It's easy to see. The whole practice of lending money based on promises would soon disappear. In such a world, no rational person would bother wasting the time to try to get a loan based on a promise to repay. So we can't even conceive of a world in which rational people make lying promises for no reason. So the maxim itself is inconsistent and irrational. This is a central Kantian claim, that immoral conduct is always inconsistent and irrational. Many philosophers before and after Kant have doubted this claim. Consider the following argument. People have a reason to do something only if doing it will get them what they care about. Doing their moral duty sometimes fails to get people what they care about. Therefore, people sometimes lack any reason to do their moral duty. If people lack any reason to do their moral duty, then violating their moral duty can be perfectly rational. Therefore, it can be perfectly rational for people to violate their moral duty. Kant rejects this argument because he thinks moral reasons are always the strongest reasons we have. He draws a distinction between two different types of directives that are addressed to us as rational beings. The first is called a hypothetical imperative, which is a command of reason that commands you to do whatever's needed in order to get what you care about. The second is a categorical imperative, which is a command of reason that doesn't depend on what you care about. The argument we just considered assumes that all rational requirements are hypothetical imperatives, that rationality just requires me to pursue what I care about. Kant denies this. He thinks rationality also requires me to obey a categorical imperative. Here's his argument. If you're rational, then you're consistent. If you're consistent, then you obey the principle of universalizability. If you obey the principle of universalizability, then you act morally. Therefore, if you're rational, then you act morally. Therefore, if you act immorally, then you're irrational. This is a difficult argument to assess, and we won't try to do so directly. Instead, let's consider the principle of universalizability itself. The principle works best to forbid actions that make unjustified exceptions for the actor's own sake. For example, Kant can probably explain why it's wrong for a thief to rob a bank in order to make money for himself. But he can't easily explain why it's wrong for a thief to rob a bank if his goal is to put banks out of business one at a time. The goal of his maxim in that case would be fulfilled if everyone adopted it. So the universalizability principle fails to condemn this particular bank robber, which seems incorrect. The same problem arises in other cases. Imagine a homeowner who wants to protect the grass on his lawn more than anything, so he kills the mailman in order to protect his grass. This is obviously immoral, but Kant doesn't seem to be able to explain why with the universalizability principle. How would it interfere with the fanatical homeowner's plan if everyone else became just as fanatical about his own law? Before we end today, let's consider Kant's famous reputation as an absolutist. Kant believes that many of our moral duties are absolute, or as he called them, perfect. The duty not to lie is one of these. This is a surprisingly strict position, and Kant knew it. He asks us to imagine a killer who shows up at your house looking for his victim, who you know to be hiding in your attic. He asks you if you've seen the person he's looking for. Kant thinks you're morally forbidden to lie to the killer, even in this extreme situation. Few people today agree with Kant on this. We'll discuss absolutism at greater length in a few days. The more interesting point for now is that Kant doesn't give a convincing argument for his own absolutism. He seems to assume that every lie is told with the maxim, "I will lie in order to benefit myself." That's not so. A different maxim would be, "I will lie in order to protect the life of an innocent person." That's your maxim if you lie to the killer at your door. What's not universalizable about that maxim? Kant doesn't explain.